And we'll move on, if I may, to our next contribution. Now, one of the things that the UIC has been doing over the last couple of years has been taking some of the ideas, some of the suggestions that have emerged and proving that they actually work. We've called them proofs of concept, or POCs. And one of those has been developed about how people who have got reduced visibility are able to move around stations. And that is quite an important thing if we're talking about accessibility to the railway system. It's not just for people who are able-bodied, it's accessibility for all. And so that's an important message as well. Our friends in VRL in Canada have been trialling this proof of concept at their station in Ottawa. And Sean Schofield from VRL is going to tell us a little bit now about how that's going and the lessons they've learned from that as well. So the floor, wherever he's gone, he's over there, is all yours, Sean, to tell us much more about what you're doing in this particular area in line with the DIGIM project as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. So first of all, I'd like to say we're very honored and grateful to be here. Is everyone able to hear me? Yes? Perfect. I'll introduce myself briefly. So yeah, my name is Sean Schofield. I'm a Senior Innovation Advisor at VRL Canada and one of the team leads on our project and our collaboration with UIC, which is really to see how could we improve, if not solve or attempt to solve, navigational autonomy for the blind and the partially sighted. As mentioned, the last time we presented, we were on the verge of testing a novel combination of technologies for the blind and partially sighted at our Ottawa station. And this collaboration was really made possible with our partnership with the Canadian Council of the Blind and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Our goal was to bring together two different technologies to make a contribution towards an international rail standard. And those two technologies are essentially an indoor GPS and a sonar band. Individually, both of these technologies have already been proven in different applications. The indoor GPS works using beacons. Essentially, we set up about 200 beacons across the Ottawa station, developed a mobile application, put it on a smartphone. The mobile application interprets the digital map which is created and leverages the compass, accelerometers, and other GPS technology on the phone. And that allows someone to essentially know where they are, what's around them, and in which direction are they moving. In other words, are they getting closer to their goal? What we wanted to do was pair this with a Sonar wristband. They look like this. And what this allows you to do is essentially point to what you're interested in detecting. So you could detect objects in front of you, behind you, to your side, above you, and so forth. And so the idea was, could we bring these two things together? Could we bring knowing where you are, knowing where you want to go, and whether or not you're trending in the right direction, and at the same time being able to avoid obstacles in all senses, could we create a fully autonomous navigational experience? So we have some data to share with you today, but first we'd really like you to see for yourself. So we started at the beginning of the year with a question. How could we help the blind and the partially sighted to navigate a station autonomously? So we're here today to move forward in the next step in our collaboration with UIC. We're testing two different technologies, beacons and a mobile app, and a Sonar wristband to help the blind and the partially sighted navigate the station autonomously.
I'm really excited to have you here today. I'm excited about today. It's a milestone day for us. This prototype is important because it's also directly linked with our long-term vision for Destination 2025. And Destination 2025 is a sustainable vision. And within that is accessibility for all passengers.
More than about the solutions, this is about the relationship. This is about the journey together. We want to succeed together. We want to misstep and screw up together. And the goal of today, the heart of today, the core, is to get at their feedback, how they use the tools, when they use the tools, and what is going to push those tools further to enhance their experience.
So remember, this is in very early stages of development, but what we're looking for here is feedback on the experience. How are you feeling? Is it overwhelming? Is it just, we want descriptors as much as possible.
I'm listening for the ticket counter. 5 o'clock, 28 feet.
I'm in waiting area 1 and 2, and I want to get to 4 and 5, so I think we got to go along this way.
I think we're here, eh?
I'm at the right area. I'm at gate 4 and 5 in this big, huge place. I found my way to the place that I need to be, so that's always a good thing.
I love it. I love it, man. It's empowering. One more tool to know where you are, and it's like coloring in the world.
First, I'd love to hear reactions.
I love the amount of information, and it's great because it kind of fills in a picture, lets you know what's all around you.
About 30 paces back, you hesitated a bit.
Yeah, because I wanted to point it at the wall and see. I could see that the wall was there.
I really wanted one of those wristbands. After trying it out in the station here, I said to myself, oh, I could use this technology everywhere I go.
If this technology was perfected, I would feel great. I'm already using similar technology outdoors. I'm using GPS to help myself find my way around outdoors. But when we get indoors, we don't have it.
What we've discussed today in implementing the beacons and navigational tools is very important because I think it's the next step to making a fully accessible station.
My hope is that today is a significant milestone on the way to contributing to an international rail standard, so that passengers in all countries across the UIC can benefit from this, and we have a universal standard for the lived experience of the blind and the partially sighted. And what would you say if we were giving you one of these wristbands today?
Really, though? I think that's the cat's pajamas. Really? I would love that. I think that will make our life so much easier. Yes.
If we can perfect what we started 8 months ago in the future, that will mean that I can comfortably walk in the front door and board the train myself. Nothing would give me more satisfaction than that.
So all of our participants are blind or partially sighted, so when we start hearing them use visual language, I can see the wall. We know that we're onto something. I want to get into the data. So what we were measuring for with the indoor GPS was essentially the time that it took the blind and partially sighted participants to autonomously navigate from curb to platform. So this means navigating from I've arrived at the station and now I have to get to the platform to catch my train. We had a group of participants who were able to do so successfully in under 3 minutes. A group of participants who were able to do so in about 5 to 7 minutes. And we had another group of participants who struggled. And I want to kind of unpack those results. So when we look at the 3-minute group, one of the things we observed was that these were all white cane users. So Dwayne and Shelley and Jim all use a white cane to get around, and when we paired them with this technology, their performance, their navigational performance was essentially on par with a regular sighted passenger. In our second category, we had Ruth, who's in a wheelchair, and Nolan, who you may have seen in the video. Nolan has a physical impairment, which causes him to be more slow when he walks. And their performance, again, they were able to successfully navigate the station. Their performance was essentially on par with sighted passengers with reduced mobility. So these would be the elderly, these would be people with young children or a lot of baggage. But, and there's probably a hint there on the right hand, your right-hand side of the screen there, we found a really interesting result, which was that some of our users already had an indoor GPS system that we hadn't fully considered, the dog, the guide dog. And for users who had a guide dog, we were now equipping them with essentially two sources of data. Data that was coming from their phone and their wristband, but here in particular the phone, that was giving them information about where they are versus where they wanted to be. And there's a 2 or 3 second delay of information when it comes from the phone as it's calculating the position on a digital map. And for the other participants who have no other frame of reference, they don't even notice this delay. But when you have a dog directing you in real time without a 2 or 3 second delay, then you suddenly get this competing information about how best to navigate the space. So what we saw was that for those individuals with dogs, so Dave and Kim, they ended up taking very, very circuitous routes around the station in order to get where they wanted, as for every step forward they would take with their dog, so to speak, they would take 2 backwards with the technology on the indoor GPS. With respect to the wristbands themselves, everyone was able to avoid walls and barriers, and more than that, very small obstacles too. So for example, the ribbons between stanchions at a ticket counter, you could detect that with these wristbands. And another use case we saw for the wristband was following lines. So even the participants with the guide dogs liked being able to point this at essentially the person in front of them and manage the sensation of haptic pulses to follow a line somewhere. So with a lot of help from many individuals, we were able to prove the concept, and I would say that there were, although we'll share in a lot more detail after this conference what we mean by all of these things, there's really kind of 6 takeaways. First is that the agile human-centered design process is, we would argue, absolutely essential. That is, when we sat down in February in our second meeting with these groups, we really said, how can we solve these problems together? We made no assumptions, we made no suppositions, we certainly made no impositions, and we got to a place where on both sides there was vulnerability. There was us admitting that we didn't know the best way to solve this problem, and there was them being willing to share their feelings, their moments of doubt, moments of frustration, moments of anger, moments of confidence in the process, and those allowed us to understand the core needs in the process. The good news, I would say, is that the core technology works. This is not a huge surprise or leap of faith. Individually, we knew these technologies worked, but what we saw is they actually work together. And part of that working is that the technology itself is very intuitive. None of these users had ever used one of these wristbands before. Some of these users had never even used a smartphone before. Ruth, for example, in her wheelchair had never used a smartphone. She had used phones before, but not a smartphone for GPS function. And within several minutes, we're talking 2 to 4 minutes of putting the devices in their hands, they're off and they're using them. Now that said, there are significant enhancements to be brought if we really want to create a universal standard, international rail standard. The first is that we'd have to revisit the guide dog user experience to figure out what kinds of information are complementary but not competitive to how the user of a guide dog interprets the signals they're receiving from their guide dog. With respect to the app itself, there's about 10 to 12 recommendations that we have that we'll be sharing with the UIC on enhancements that can be brought to the indoor GPS experience. And I would say more broadly, stepping back from this holistically, while we've proven the concept, we still have the challenge that this is currently more than one device, and it isn't yet hands-free. And that might seem trivial for a lot of us, but if you have one hand on a guide dog and one hand on a piece of luggage, you don't have another hand for a device. And when currently, if you put your mobile phone in your pocket, things like the accelerometer, things like the compass don't work quite as well. And so there's technology issues there, but the broader issue as well is the socioeconomic status of the blind and the partially sighted. In Canada, the average income for blind and partially sighted falls between just under $20,000 to the low $20,000. And so asking them to invest in two different sophisticated technologies is out of reach for many of them. The thing that I would leave us with is that although we're using technology as a catalyst here, this is about the real difference it makes for this cohort of people. When we had our second meeting with the Canadian Council of the Blind and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, we did a full workshop day with them where essentially we did a series of empathy sessions that allowed us to understand the moments that matter in their journeys. And really, when you boil that down, what they want is the same as what all of us want in a travel experience: clarity and choice. We have that in common. What we don't have in common is that very often they do not have the means to have that clarity and choice in their travel experience. And so it's easy to get caught up in the process or the technology development, but as you heard Ruth say, this will make our lives easier. As you heard Nolan say, these are tools that allow us to color in the world. So my hope is that some of our work inspires you to ask the question, how might we help to make the lives of our blind and partially sighted passengers, peers, and community members better? How will we help them to color in the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think that's an extraordinarily powerful piece of work that you've undertaken there. And I've learnt a new expression. I've never heard of the cat's pajamas. Sorry, said with an English accent. I do apologise. I should say it with a Canadian accent, but the cat's pajamas. But that's probably more American than the Canadian. Bee's knees, yeah, exactly. Does anybody have anything that they would like to ask Sean about any of that? I think there's an incredible amount of stuff. I mean, the fact about the dog. I mean, the fact that the two GPS systems. I mean, that I'm sure what you said right in the beginning of the VT. You said screw up together. Maybe that's an example of not necessarily screwing up, but learning from experience through this. And I think it's a supreme experience with all of it. The one thing I would say is that the outcome of what Sean and his colleagues are doing in VRL will, once the IRS that Sean has referred to is produced and the project is concluded, will be made available to everybody. So this is not just something that VRL are going to keep for themselves and say, it's ours, go away. No, that's going to be something that everybody will be able to use, and you'll be able to use it in your own applications, in your own places. And together, what we can do then, of course, is to empower all of our customers in order to ensure that we are encouraging them, how was it, to colour the world. I love that as well. I think that was fabulous. Great. Sean, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for coming all the way from Canada to give us that experience.